Adventurous audio. From idea to ear. Can good ever come from tragedy? What can we learn from losing someone to suicide that might protect ourselves and the other people we love from anything so sad ever happening again? And how do we balance loss and grief with the idea that it might have given us the capacity to lead a better, more considered life ourselves? That is at the heart of this episode of Speaking of Suicide, where I'm talking to Alex Anderson, whose brother Will, a vibrant and passionate primary school teacher, took his own life in February 2021, sending shockwaves through his young family, friends, colleagues, and the pupils he taught. Just before we get underway, if listening to this is tough and you need support, please press pause. You'll find the details for Mikey's line in the show notes. Alex, what do you remember of the day Will took his life?
The main thing I remember is it was a beautiful day at the end of February 21. Really beautiful, sunny day. For me, it was the end of half-term week. I have 2 children. So my wife and I were in the middle of juggling lockdown work, because of course that was lockdown 2. Lockdown work and kids. And so I'd taken some time off at the end of that half-term week. And that's my primary memory. Actually, it sounds bizarre, but it really was a beautiful sunny day, and I'd planned to go for a bike ride with my 2 girls. And the bikes were loaded on the car. My wife was busy working all day, so I hadn't seen her since breakfast. And I had a call on the landline, which basically meant my parents, because landlines are generally only used by parents, and that's about it these days. And it was my dad. And he's unfortunately suffers from some ill health, has done for a few years, so he sounded a bit distant, but there's nothing unusual in that. But very quickly he laid it out that my brother Will had died. And it was very matter of fact, it was very brief. I could hear my mother in the background, clearly upset, clearly wasn't able to talk to me, and the call finished within a minute. But I just remember putting the phone down. It was literally 60 seconds, 90-second call. It was very, very brief. I guess I was in shock immediately, as you would imagine, having just been told something like that. But I do remember looking out the window and just seeing this incredible blue sky. And it was a bizarre sort of juxtaposition of, I'd just been thinking, what a gorgeous sunny day, what a treat to go out for a bike ride in the fresh air with my girls. And then that news lands, and then I have to make a decision about what I do next, with my wife tied up on a call till 6 o'clock that evening.
So what did you do?
I went for a bike ride with them as I planned, which may be shocking to people. They were upstairs. I knew at that point I couldn't. The first person, obviously, I would have talked to was my wife, but I couldn't. She was otherwise engaged, as I say, completely locked up on a call all day. So it was just me, and I don't quite know how long. It didn't feel like very long, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to try and sort of collect myself and make a decision. But I decided to stick with the plan and go for a bike ride with my girls. Might sound callous, but it's difficult to know how to process such a bombshell. And it just seemed to me as though that was the best thing to do. Get outside, to be honest. Get outside, get into the fresh air. Felt like the most appropriate thing to do, and to try and keep some sense of normality in what was a clearly very abnormal situation, and that I realised was going to create seismic waves for a lot of people.
Let's talk a little bit more about Will, your younger brother. How old was he when he took his life?
He was 39, so yep, didn't quite make 40. 39 years old, yep.
And were you close? Tell me about how was it as brothers growing up?
Well, he was the third one in a line of four, so
all boys.
All boys. So 4 boys. That's a handful. Yeah, my parents definitely did their fair share of work on that front. He was 4 years younger than me, so there was a bit of an age gap between us. My next brother, Dan Chris, is quite close in age to me, 16 months younger. So we were physically quite sort of well matched, Chris and I. Will, 4 years younger, was obviously physically that much smaller and was always sort of trying to play catch up, but of course was never going to do that with a 4-year age gap. And then my brother Ed, who's 12 years younger than me, so quite 8 years between Will and Ed. So for us, certainly for Chris and I, Ed was almost like, we were practicing parenting from when we were sort of 11 and 12 when he turned up. I think my mum at least got something back from us at that point. Maybe a little bit.
And what was Will like in character? You alluded there to the idea that he was a bit different to you and Chris.
Well, he was a lovely brother. He was a lovely kid. He always had a twinkle. I think the thing that most people remember Will by is his smile. He was definitely one of life's smilers, and it's rare to see any picture of Will where he hasn't got this big kind of megawatt smile on his face. That was very much Will, and I think anyone would say the same. He was one of life's smilers, which is why when he died, and the way he died, for a lot of people who didn't realise he'd been suffering with ill health, he was very private about that, it would have potentially come as an even kind of greater shock, because he just he wouldn't have been the kind of candidate you would have necessarily thought of, because he always seemed so sunny and positive. And
what were his great passions in life? Did he have great passions in life? What was he sunny and positive about?
Oh yeah. No, he had plenty of passions. I think I can empathise. I think all of us as brothers have got quite a few different interests, and I can certainly empathise with Will. We actually did the same degree. So Will did a music degree, I did a music degree, but we were also very much into the outdoors and outdoor activities. So for me, it was cycling. Also, it was for Will. He was into cycling. His big love at university was canoeing. He did a lot of adventures, some I gathered subsequently pretty hairy. Spent time in Uganda after university. And we discovered that he almost drowned sort of twice whilst whitewater rafting down there. So he was definitely he was into the outdoors in a big way. So we shared that common ground of music and I guess more broadly sort of arts enjoyment, but particularly the outdoors as well. So he had he had passions, but musically he played various instruments. All of us brothers were choristers, and we grew up in Cambridge, so we were all choristers at a college in Cambridge, and so that was a big part of our lives growing up when we were young. I spent a lot of time psalm singing out, and at the time it perhaps wasn't something we always wanted to do, but it absolutely shaped us, all of us, in I think a fairly positive way, and it certainly shaped Will, and I think that was one of the reasons why two of us at least ended up going on to study music to a higher level. It gets into your blood at that age.
Sounds like he had an amazingly kind of full and rich life from hearing it from this perspective. Where you said these music and things shaped him. Where did it shape him? Where did he end up in terms of his career? What did he end up doing?
So he music, although he didn't go into music professionally in a sort of full on way, if you like, he absolutely did use that musical upbringing and musical training as a degree in his job. He became a teacher, and with a specialism in primary. So he was a primary teacher, and I think, as lots of us will be aware of, there aren't actually that many men who choose to go into primary teaching. He did, and he was clearly brilliant at it, and he used that musical training to be the music lead in the schools that he was taught at. So he taught at a few over his teaching career, and it was clear after he died, and that's one of the ironies, you find out so many things after someone's not here about how great they were and talented they were and what they brought to their job. But clearly he did special things as a music lead, and a lot of kids and parents and staff benefited from that.
So it sounds like you were obviously aware as his brother of the passions and the things, I guess, like music that he brought to other people into his teaching. How much were you aware of the mental health challenges that he went through? Was that something he went through his whole life, and was it something that you were able to share? Did he share it with any of you brothers?
Not really, no. And I wish he had, but he didn't really. He was quite private in that regard. We grew up in a very loving household, but I guess quite a traditional household. Certainly, both sets of grandparents were quite conservative in their thinking, I guess, in lots of ways. Not unusual for of those generations, but it did mean that the freedom to express oneself emotionally was perhaps a bit limited. And I'm not saying this is any kind of criticism whatsoever in terms of our upbringing and our parents. Not at all. It's more of a kind of cultural issue that lots of us who've grown up in a slightly sort of straightened Protestant background, choristers in the church. I mean, there's baggage there to a degree. There's stuff that you just kind of wear without even realizing it, that it realizes you end up zipping it.
So at what point? I mean, did you realize before he ended up at the age of 39 taking his life so very suddenly and terribly? Were you aware though of him having mental health challenges before that?
Yes, I was. I was. I think the first time I was aware of it was when he was studying to be a teacher as doing postgraduate study. He clearly found that quite stressful. I mean, I know others who've gone into that line of work. It is stressful. Our teachers do an amazing job. They're incredible. And the teaching training is obviously quite intense. So he did find he took some time out for a little period in order to complete his teacher training. And that was the first I was aware that he was struggling with his mental health. Clearly that was in his early 20s. We talked about it a little bit, but not very much. He obviously didn't want to talk about it particularly. My parents didn't particularly want to. They probably felt it wasn't really their place to talk about it as such. So that was the first I was aware of him suffering from some ill health. Yeah. Then he finished his course and he threw himself into his teaching as an NQT, newly qualified teacher, and things appeared to be pretty smooth for really quite a long time after that, certainly all the way through his 20s into his 30s.
It can be incredibly difficult, can't it? Because I've got members of my family who've suffered very badly from depression in particular. And when they're in the thick of it, they don't want to talk about it, and you don't want to go there because it's obviously they're in a painful and unhappy place. And then when they're out of it, you're also delighted to see them happier and back enjoying life. That the idea of somehow saying, well, shall we talk about when you were really unhappy? It's difficult. The time somehow never comes up. So I entirely empathise with what you're saying. Was it just depression? Was it something that was recurrent? Were you aware of an ongoing problem for Will?
It largely was depression. He did have a diagnosis ultimately of being bipolar, so he did have ups as well as downs. I don't think he the little I did talk about it with him, I don't think he was convinced that was necessarily a good diagnosis. I mean, such a complex area, and putting such a crude label on something is, well, not always very helpful. But he did have ups and he did have downs. He did get very enthusiastic about things, be that canoeing, music, and he'd often, really buzz, perhaps in a way that others might not buzz in quite that intense way. I never really noticed the downs that much with him. I was more aware of the kind of the ups and the enthusiastic embrace of life. But actually, isn't that nice? I think we all need a bit more of that in life. There's not enough people who do.
Yeah, and that image of him as being someone who's enthusiastically embracing life, I mean, it does cut against the idea that person also then had the capacity to take that life. Had you any notion that might be part of his picture? Did you have any sense ever that he may have suicidal thoughts or be considering that kind of action?
Right at the very end, I did. This was a few weeks before he died. He had for want of a way of putting it, a breakdown. I mean, that's a pretty horrible kind of crude term, but he clearly in the Christmas 20 had reached a difficult place, and didn't go back into teaching the new term in January. Clearly wasn't well enough to do that, and it clearly was quite serious at that point. Of course, the really awful thing then was this was right at the point we were all deep in lockdown too. We just all got locked down again. So we'd all lived through lockdown 1, which was, isn't this novel? We don't have to go to work. We can work remotely. Schools are shut, and it's really sunny. And isn't this quite fun? To, not again. Deep winter, cold, freezing, kids, schoolwork. Really, really, really stressful, completely different situation. So that made it infinitely more complicated because all of us were trying to abide by the rules that had been set for us in terms of what we could and couldn't do. And what was officially allowed was extremely grey.
And terribly difficult as well to offer each other support because we weren't allowed to really physically see each other terribly much. Particularly not if you were at a distance already. We couldn't travel to go and spend time with each other. I mean, reflecting back on that, do you think that second lockdown was a significant factor in all this?
Yes, I do. It's hard. I can't see that it wasn't a significant factor in all this because we simply did not see one another in a way that we would have done had he reached the place he'd got to. I think many people would have rallied and would have gone to see him, gone out for a bike ride, gone out for a walk. And we didn't do those things because I guess we felt we shouldn't. We've been told we shouldn't do it, and none of us really knew how ill he was.
And I suppose being away from school as well, he's not having interactions with colleagues, with the kids, with all these kind of mechanisms that might recognise that someone was struggling or the depth of someone's struggles.
Yes.
Incredibly difficult.
Incredibly difficult. I think it will still be many years before it's really fully understood the impact of these lockdowns on everybody. But I definitely feel that constraint was really, really unhelpful. And that's putting it mildly.
So very sadly, in the February after that Christmas when he was struggling so much, Will took his own life. Alex, how much do you think about that?
I think about it every day. But I don't think about it as in such an all-consuming way now, 3.5 years later, as I did. And I remember early on I had some counselling, and I do remember something that was said in one of the early sessions. It's quite a simple way of thinking about grief, and I think it's true. The counsellor said to me, often people think about grief as a hand right in front of your face. And to start with, it's right there, right in front of you, and all you can see is the hand. But over time, it gets further away, and you can see more around the hand. You can see more of the bigger picture, but the hand will still be there. And I think that's quite a good way of thinking about it, and that's how I think about it. No, the hand's still there. I think about him all the time, really. But it's not every minute of every day. It's not every hour of every day. And it certainly, initially, it was very all-consuming and very difficult to talk about, really. I can talk about it a bit more easily now, but it's taken quite a while.
What has been the impact for you? Now, presumably, that hand has moved a little bit away from your face and you're able to see the bigger picture, both, I guess, Will's bigger picture, but also your bigger picture.
I think there are a few things, really. One of them is, as I say, he was a teacher. He was a primary teacher. And the school he was teaching at when he died was obviously very badly affected. That's a terrible tragedy for a school to have to... It was quite a big school. To have to process that with all these children who obviously thought he was pretty great. You know, Mr. Anderson was clearly a popular teacher and a popular member of staff. And we struck up a relationship that's ongoing with the school. My family, my parents, my brothers, wider family, and we still have that connection. And we've been to visit the school a number of times since he died. And I certainly remember the first time we went. Yeah, we talked about him a lot, and it did feel after that initial, gosh, this is quite intense. It was joyous. It was celebratory because, as I alluded to earlier, we discovered all these brilliant things about him that he did for so many people that none of us really knew about it. And that is one of the great sadnesses, isn't it, when someone's suddenly not here, that people don't really talk about their jobs very much. In fact, the only time I really heard Will talk about his job, as with many of us, was when things weren't going so well and you're sort of moaning about a colleague or whatever, some political situation. But of course, there's so many good things that go on for many of us in our jobs, but we don't really think about it or talk about it. It's only afterwards you think, oh, hang on a second. He did some amazing things and touched a lot of people. And clearly it was a lot of people. The school he was previously teaching at, he clearly touched a lot of people. We've subsequently raised money in his memory, and an awful lot of people have come out of the woodwork, if you like, and said he was instrumental. He did this with my kid. He really opened up their eyes, their ears to X and mine. Those networks are really profound. And of course, we didn't realise it until we'd gone to the school and had that opportunity to talk to them all. So it was very sad, but it also was the first time really, I guess, we had to celebrate. Bearing in mind, of course, when he died, it was deep in lockdown. We couldn't have a normal, in inverted commas, funeral. It was a few of us, masked up, families separated pew by pew, no singing. And this is a guy who was a chorister. Yeah.
Have you been able to redress that? Have you been able to sing in his memory latterly?
collectively, we haven't, and that's a kind of complex area. I think individually and as groups, as then small groups, we've certainly got together in small groups and remembered him in other ways, if not musically in that way. Having said that, we've been, as part of the trips back to the school, we've been given amazing experiences of kids singing to us, his kids. That was pretty powerful, yeah.
I bet. And in terms of how you think now about your own mental health and the health of those kind of nearest and dearest to you, has Will's death allowed you to think differently? And if so, in what ways? What ways has it changed your approach to your own mental health, if at all?
Oh yeah, it's undoubtedly changed the way I think about my mental health, and I can't speak for other people, but I would be surprised if it hadn't had a similar impact on other close family and friends. I think one of the things that a lot of us in life sweat the small stuff. It's that phrase which is thrown around, and it's quite a good one because it's quite easy, isn't it, in life to allow fairly trivial things to bog you down and to obsess about stuff that ultimately doesn't really matter. Actually, just a little bit of a tangent, that's one of the things I think that, thinking back on it, that probably Will really appreciate about the outdoors, and I certainly feel it for myself, that when you're in the outdoors and you're surrounded by nature, you're somewhere where you're not surrounded by lots of other people and buildings, the elements. You look at the stars and you feel completely insignificant. How healthy that is, and so I think that's something that I get from that. But I'm sure Will did too. But that ability to try and step back from the sort of noise of life is hard. We all struggle with it, but I've definitely found, having gone through such a awful trauma, that the perspective on the big stuff that matters has been reframed in a way that's very helpful and very healthy. I feel guilt is an emotion that I think, well, I know because I've read around it, it's something that a lot of people feel when someone has died having taken their own life. What could I have done? You rake over conversations you've had, messages you didn't send, all the stuff that is there and is very hard to shake off. You'll probably never really shake it off. It'll probably always be there, rattling around in the back of your head to a degree. So it's a complex emotion, and there's many aspects of why one might feel guilty. But one of the things that I feel that's wrapped into my sort of feelings of guilt, I'm getting better at it, but it's still there, is the fact that because he died and sort of the way he died, I now have this ability, I think, to sort of reframe life in a way that's perhaps a bit healthier than I would have done previously. What a gift that is.
And that makes you feel guilty?
Yeah. That it took something like that, something so awful like that, in order to sort of help me look at life with a different perspective, a healthier perspective. I do feel guilty about that. I guess another way of thinking about it is sort of honouring his memory, and using that in a very constructive, positive way. That's a much better way of thinking about it, rather than feeling guilty, because that's. But it's still hard. But I do feel as though honouring his memory, all the positive things that he did, remembering all the strengths that he had, and trying to use those to sort of help other people or inspire other people is a bit grand. But I think you sort of get where I'm coming from in terms of those feelings.
I do, and I mean, obviously, I didn't know Will at all. But I think a fitting legacy for anyone is to maybe to give others in your wake a renewed awareness of how precious life is, and of your own health and all these kind of things. I think awful to have lost him, but to be able to recognise the gift that he gave you in going, I think is an amazing. Yeah, I want to use the word strength on your part. I really do. I think it's. I haven't talked to anyone who's ever for this series said that, and I think it's an important thing to have said and to have recognised, and to sort of, by hearing you say it, I'm hoping it will allow anyone else hearing this to maybe recognise some of that in their own grief if they're going through similar stuff, Alex.
I hope so. I hope so. I think it's really important to. It's really important to try. You can't do it initially when the maelstrom is raging and you can't think straight at all. But it's really, once that's abated a bit, it's really important to try and focus on what's the good stuff that's left here. What can we all collectively pull on to help ourselves, to help other people? And Will had bags of it, absolutely bags of it. And I think now, yeah, it sounds, just talking it through, it sounds silly to say I should feel guilty about it, but it's complex. Why should it take that? Why should it take him to have taken his life for me to have realised that?
But sadly, it so often takes something really, really difficult for big realizations like that to happen. It's not always suicide, but time and again, it's these things that change us, and if it can change us for the better, well, all to the better.
Yes.
Finally, Alex, where have you settled at the moment? I think it's probably an ongoing process, but where have you settled at the moment with Will's choice to take his life? How do you feel about Will now?
I mean, another complicated emotion is that he was clearly suffering greatly, and part of you is glad for him that suffering has ended. So that's another feeling, which is complicated. But I guess it's human. You're empathizing with someone else's plight, aren't you? And no one, unless you're a complete sadist, no one wants to see someone in a really difficult and fraught situation. In terms of me and sort of settling, I definitely haven't gone through 2-3 years of upset and more, and perhaps slightly more unpredictable emotions, unpredictable responses to certain situations. I'm definitely feeling a bit more anchored, a bit more stable. Just recently, I got together with my other brothers, with Chris and Ed, and some close friends, and we got together for a weekend and rode all around Yorkshire and raised a lot of money in Will's memory, again honouring him. And that ability to coming back to the hand analogy, that ability to sort of see the bigger, to hold on to all the positive things, to celebrate, to remember the positive stuff, and to use that to inspire other positive change through through raising money and helping, but which that will obviously help other people, and getting together and helping ourselves as a group of family and friends by talking and remembering him. That's a much better, more stable place now. Having said that, the regrets, as I alluded to, of what messages that could have got sent, phone calls that maybe could have happened which didn't happen, I think they'll always be there. I don't think it's a bit naive to think that they will disappear completely. But yeah, fundamentally, remembering him in a much more positive light is where I'm at now, and I would hope other people, close family, friends, and colleagues, and some of the kids he taught would be in that place too. Yeah, but I do wish he'd talked a bit more. That's a regret. But then that's probably a failing of mine. I didn't ask the questions. Why should I have expected him to have talked? Yeah.
We don't know if he'd have given you the answers, Alex. Alex, thank you so much for being so open and honest with us. It's been a real privilege to have you on Speaking of Suicide.
Thank you.
I was talking to Alex Anderson. Shona McPherson has been listening to our conversation. Shona, what struck you?
Yeah, I think if there was one word to describe what I heard from Alex there, is perspective. Yeah, the perspective that he's gained on life through his tragic experience of losing Will, and just how that's given him the perspective of how short and how precious our life is, and the importance of focusing on what matters. He says, talked about getting bogged down and then being outside in nature and looking at the stars and feeling completely insignificant in a wonderful way, and just how healthy he finds that for himself. And the second takeaway I had was I loved his way of allowing guilt to be a companion to him, and noticing that it wasn't in the foreground as it had been, as it often is for us at the sort of earlier stages of losing somebody to suicide. But yeah, allowing it to be there, and maybe that softening that the part holding the guilt had. But yeah, just him living with that, and I think that's so realistic. And he talked towards the end there about really wishing he had talked more openly with Will and vice versa, and that now this what a gift he's giving us, and what a gift Will's legacy has given us in terms of here's another conversation where someone has the courage to share their hard-won perspective. So yeah, thank you very much to Alex for his courage to share.
Thanks, Shona. So don't forget, if you do need someone to talk to or some help, you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55, or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. You can also go and visit them at The Hive. They're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m, and all those details and links are in the show notes. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line. This series in particular is being supported by McDonald's in the community, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode or a series, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.